Hello, OnyxPathCon, and welcome to our first panel, Disability in Tabletop. We're all disabled folks, and we're going to talk about some of the challenges and cool things going on in the disability space inside tabletop role-playing games, and probably some other stuff as well. But first, we'll introduce ourselves. We'll go around, start with David.
Hi, my name is David Castro. Onyx Path fans will probably find my work in 𝚃𝚘𝚍𝚙𝚙𝚎𝚛, Dragon, and other upcoming Scion books. Also in Trinity Adventure and Scarred Lands Dead Man's Rust.
Excellent. Todd?
My name is Todd Crapper. Onyx Path fans should have absolutely no idea who I am unless you also overlap in other games. Yeah, it's always a great privilege to be on one of these panels.
Absolutely. And Spider?
I'm Spider, and my pronouns are he, they. I got my start with Onyx Path in Vampire the Requiem. I have also written for Changeling the Lost, and my stuff is in the abyss between when I turn it in and when it actually comes out. And then I've also written for Scion, Trinity, all the other things that, you know, basically if Onyx Path puts it out with a few exceptions, I've probably written on it.
Yeah, I think you've got just about everything at this point.
Yep.
Hugmeyer.
Well,
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yes, that was the perfect time to hit me up for work, Spider.
I've already done it officially. I was just teasing you.
I know. And as for me, my name is Eddy Webb. My pronouns are he, him. I am the in-house developer at Onyx Path. I handle the Story Path games, as well as some of the creator-owned stuff like Hugmeyer, which is my own property. And also, I've been working with Rich, both between Onyx Path and CCP for almost 15 years now. So I just am kind of the old man on the mountain in that regard. I know where the bodies are buried. Let's kind of dig into this. A lot of when people think about disability in tabletop, I mean, one of the first things I think that comes up are things like assistive tools that can help folks in playing these games. For example, physical components are a big part of that space that I think a lot of people don't think about until it's pointed out to them and they go, oh yeah, there should be a lot of that. So like, I know there are some companies that are actually making stuff to try to help people with getting access to games. dotsrpg.org, a great company, but they make Braille dice, for example, which is great for blind gamers. And of course, Todd, you're also doing some stuff in terms of making things more accessible for people.
Yeah, one of the things last year I did a Kickstarter and worked with quite a few indie publishers to basically create updated versions of PDFs for products like Time Watch from Pelgrane Press, Capers from Nerdburger Games, Ninja Crusade, about a dozen titles we ended up unlocking. And the idea was to update these PDFs so that there are more options that are available for people with print disabilities, which is basically can be anywhere from having some issues with certain types of reading, vision-based disabilities, and that kind of thing, to provide some different options so that you can include different types of fonts. You could even include dyslexia-friendly fonts to be able to have where you can actually turn the color on and off so that if you're having issues with anything in the red spectrum or in the blue spectrum, you could actually just remove the color completely so you can see everything in a grayscale so that everyone's working off of a similar product. So yeah, that was something that we worked on this year just as one additional tool in what seems to be this kind of growing milieu of more accessibility friendly options that are out there for gamers, especially.
Absolutely. And I mean, how is that? I mean, like, was it one of those things that like, it was a simple thing that no one ever used before, or was it like a challenge to kind of create those tools? I mean, what was the process like?
Well, it started off where a couple of people that I ended up meeting locally. I live in the Ottawa area of Canada. And so just so everyone geographically knows, that's the capital of Canada. It's not Toronto. It's a geography lesson. That's a bonus point.
There you go.
And but it was one of those things where a lot of the stuff that I've been doing before, I was a big fan of splashing things with the color red. It'd just be like, oh, it's a really bloody game. So blood splatter everywhere. In fact, my miniatures when I was a kid, everything was splattered blood. It's weird. Should have seen somebody about that. But they let me know that they had some issues actually being able to read the material because I would put headers in red. And I have one friend, and I can never remember the name of it, but he basically, with red, it's either just not there at all, or it's so difficult for him to be able to make out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I had another friend who is once again, because I have a hard time with nouns and stuff, but he has a very specific form of vision-based disability. And so he was always getting back to me to say, is like, well, you know, my screen reader is actually having a hard time with it. So I started to kind of learn about these accessibility options that existed already. But I was also too, I really liked what I did in the layout already. So rather than change it, I thought, what if I could play it both ways, where I make it look the way I want it to, but then I do things so that other people who don't have the same, you know, access to all the spectrum of light that I do can then also access it. And then if I can't make it work for as many other people as possible, then it's time for me to make a decision of, do I actually need to have it in there? Like if I can't find another way to demonstrate blood splatter, then I need to find another way to do it.
Right.
And it's been something that's been over the years. It's definitely a more thought-provoking process. You really have to know exactly what you're doing, and going and doing everything backwards compatible, I have been learning these last few months, is a serious ass kicker. But, you know, the number of people that reached out during the Kickstarter to say, you know, like, even though this might not work for everybody, it's going to work for some people. And I've been waiting for this opportunity. I've never been able to actually look at my copy. Some people have said I had to print out a copy of Time Watch so that I could actually see everything because there's no black and white version, you know, and that kind of stuff, you know. So knowing that I'm busting my hump, I actually broke a computer trying to work on one file.
Oh, no.
Knowing that so anyways, but knowing that there are people out there that could use something like this and that it opens the doors a little bit wider, it feels like it's completely worth the effort and the sweat, because it just gets easier as time goes on.
It really is one of those things where if you're not in the category, it may not be as obvious to you from the beginning. Like, to kind of slide sideways a little bit into video gaming as just an example that I think a lot of people will know. It's almost impossible to play Among Us if you're colorblind, because there's no patterns, right?
Yeah.
And my wife is colorblind. And so I was really into this game and I was playing it. I was like, oh, come play with me. But there's no way for her to know, you know, and who's doing what, and they don't carry your hats over into the chat, you know, so I'm sorry.
That's fine. But I mean, that's a good point, though, is that sometimes with existing games, you have to try to, disabled folks have to try to work our way around to find a new vector into that game. And I know, David, you've talked in the past about trying to find alternative modes of play for some games that have very distinct physical components.
Yeah, there's a category of games out there where instead of dice rolling, or perhaps in addition to it, there's some sort of like other physical component, say pulling from a Jenga tower or stacking dice, where I'll just say, I can't do that. And it's not because I want to play Dread so much. I have wanted to for years. I cannot pull from a Jenga table. Tower. It's just not going to work for me. So I end up, at least for myself, I find like I'm just gonna like form other ways to play the game. I've done like dice pools where I have to like take away dice for every round that we go around, so that the like chances of a success get smaller and smaller, things like that. Just so that I could play the game at all. And I wish it would be beneficial for me personally and be just interesting to see where that sort of like innovative like mechanics away from dice, because even dice can be complicated for some, where we can find other ways to play these games that are both intriguing and accessible.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And that kind of taps into something that I've had issues with in puzzle based, where they a TTRPG or a LARP uses puzzles, right? In order to represent a challenge. Where if it's a memory based puzzle, you know, I may have an issue with it that I can't get around. If it's a word based puzzle, I have mild aphasia, so being able to like summon a particular noun at a given time, and I've seen, you know, similar problems with dyscalculia, dyslexia, you know, relying on Sudoku as an example of, you know, and again, to draw back to the color blindness, there's a LARP that I was aware of that used puzzle games that were color reliant as a means of saying, oh, you're an engineer, you're doing an engineer thing, solve this thing on your phone, and when you're done solving this thing on your phone, then you've completed the task. And so for someone who is colorblind, for someone who doesn't have good fine motor, you know, those all become ways that they can be excluded from the game. So I think really the challenge is, if you're going to do something like that, at least from my perspective, if you set this and say, okay, we're going to use Sudoku, but you could also do whatever else, you know, like have an alternate. Because at least if you come prepared with an alternate for a player who may not have the same sort of accessibility that you do to the elements that you're using, then you're not by default shutting someone out, I guess is the way to put it.
And just for me personally, I've always said that like I'm playing a wizard with a 20 intelligence. Cool. I am not that person though.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And I am really bad at like puzzles on the spot. Don't take me to your escape room. I have always failed. So like my character should be able to do this like that. David cannot.
Right.
Yep.
So I've never really enjoyed puzzles in gaming just generally, but even more on I just can't do them. If I have to like physically do like a puzzle, my hands suck. I can't. And I would like to enjoy this thing, and it'd be great if there was something else, or if there was just like we just like check my character. Yeah, I should be able to do this. Cool, I do it, and just move it along. I feel like a lot of these things sort of hinder normal gameplay as well as accessible gameplay. And at least for me, if I can phrase things in a way that like somebody who is completely able can understand and go, oh man, that sucks, that hits me too, I can get them to get on the side of like making these things accessible.
Mm-hmm.
If I can like explain it in a way that it hits them, because like you're not going to understand that. Like I can't speak sometimes.
Yeah, which actually kind of hits something that I know that Eddy, you and I have kind of discussed in other contexts, is that when we're coming into this new virtual environment, there's a lot of things that we may need to be more aware of as far as accessibility opportunities and accessibility traps, I guess, for lack of a better, fallback spots. Where, for example, for me, virtual gaming where we are using voice is very difficult for me when I'm not at a table with someone, right? I kind of need it. I need there to be text, because if I'm not able to easily look at people's faces and see them, it's hard for me to understand what's being said. And it makes me anxious and I don't enjoy myself. So even if I might be able to achieve that, and be able, it makes the experience less enjoyable if I have to like focus so much of my energy on what did Eddy just say? What did David just say? Am I keeping up? And then I'm not able to really immerse myself, in the character in the situation. And I think we get a lot of opportunities to kind of approach this with the different tools. You're not going to be using text, for example, at a face-to-face con. So that opens up an option for us. Do we want to, use that option? And how do we accommodate a number of people, in order to make the table as welcoming as possible? Because that's really what it comes down to. Like, who is your table welcoming to?
Right. And you bring up a good point. That a lot of able folks, I think, they'll see something and say, oh, this gives new opportunities for this section of disability. And it sometimes comes across like as a magic bullet. It's like, okay, cool. So we have solved disability. And it's like, no, it usually brings additional challenges. There's no assistive aid that gives you abled's motion or abled's ability. It always comes with its own unique challenges. So like, just like you were saying, for a while, video conferences were great because I could actually see people's mouths and I could adjust volumes. It's like, great, I could turn the volume up and it's not going to bother anybody. And I don't have to keep asking, I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Because that was great. But then the flip side is that I had to so hyper-focus on the conference, I was exhausting. And
it's really tiring, for sure.
But like David said, I was able to kind of focus on board a little bit. So he's like, yeah, man, don't you hate 8-hour Zoom calls? Like, yeah. It's like, well, that's me all the time, right? So, because I have to pay attention to everyone's face and I have to always keep them in motion so I can kind of, semi-lip read for a while. And that takes a lot out of me. And so you understand how I feel now. And then again, with going back to tabletop games, it's a chance to kind of start that conversation. But also it can, at least I've found, is frustrating because sometimes stuff that really helps us come at the table, people can dismiss, and it ends up hurt. Like I know you've talked about how safety tools are not just a thing that helps people feel comfortable at the table, but also it can be very much a mental health accessibility tool, and mental health is exactly another kind of disability.
As soon as you said like things that people can dismiss, I'm like, okay, so we're going to talk about this now? Because I know that
lined it up for you there.
You lined it right up for me. Especially, and this is a great way to kind of, so Changeling, right, which is an Onyx path, especially Changeling the Lost, and Vampire and a lot of these other games, you have the opportunity to really delve into deep emotional role play, and just essential, especially with Changeling, essential theme is trauma and dealing with trauma, and the 4 seasonal courts are all trauma responses and all of those things. But that can mean that people who are mentally ill, who have mental health challenges, however they would personally like to phrase it for themselves, can sometimes find those games more challenging, especially if or completely off the table if we don't have good safety tools in place. Fortunately, the Changeling book has some excellent options for safety tools that I highly recommend. We use them in the game that I've been running for like the last year and a half, and they are really good. But without those tools in place, Changeling becomes actively dangerous for someone who has post-traumatic stress disorder, who has, all of those other things. It becomes not a safe game in the same way that, juggling knives is not a safe thing to do at a tabletop. It's not a physical danger, but it is absolutely a danger. It can end up with people having dangerous bleed, it can lead into episodes. And that's just, it's really difficult to get across to people who either have never dealt with anything like that, or we do have a certain like edgelord quotient in the TTRPG community, which it just kind of is what it is, right? But the pushback that comes back on this a lot of times is for people who've never dealt with a mental health issue or who have maybe built up some unhealthy coping mechanisms to things. And I'm not going to sit here and armchair diagnose people, but like, you know, if you aren't used to dealing with these things in a constructive fashion in day to day, then you want to come to the table and you may bring those non-constructive things with you. And that's kind of, I think, where a lot of the debate around, do we have these safety tools, unfortunately, it comes down to. You know, there are people who say, well, we didn't have this before, why do we have it now? Well, you know, we didn't. And when I was a kid in the 90s, we didn't wear bikes and I got a concussion and spent 4 days in the hospital. So what's your point? You know,
Right. Yeah.
It's a pretty basic idea.
I didn't have Bluetooth enabled hearing aids, you know, 10 years ago. I use them now because they're great.
And they're fantastic, right? Like I've got these wonderful bone conduction and I can hear you wonderfully. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is wonderful. Why did I never have this before?
Even too, that not having safety tools before. So it's like, so are we saying that in the 70s, the 80s, and in the 90s, no gaming group ever broke up? At no point in time did somebody just mysteriously stop showing up to a game after that one session. You know, these are tools that have developed over time in response to a need. And I think the way that, you know, with safety tools and overlapping when it comes to accessibility is that it's all about variety. It's all about being able to be flexible enough to account for different ways to approach something. Tabletop RPGs have always touted themselves as being very flexible. You know, it's like, you know, this one book, you could run 1,000 different games, you know, and it's customizable. That's why in the early drafts, they said, you know, like rulings over rules. You do whatever you need to do with the material that we give you. And to then only have like one concrete way. And it does happen with some game designs, like in the case of Dread, it is one of those things where it's like, it's really tricky to come up with something that can, you know, perfectly emulate the experience of being able to draw the block. But at the same time, too, there is another way that's out there. What it is, I don't know. I'm not here to plug it. But it's that flexibility, that ability to be able to adapt in a situation. Even in the case of safety tools, you know, if you go to a con and the safety tool that they require is the X card, well, that's not always going to work all the time across the board for everybody. And in fact, in some cases, if you are somebody who has come from abusive relationships where being shut down is actually a trigger for you, the X card can actually do a lot of damage if it's not being reinforced with other safety tools. So it's about being able to adapt and adjust, you know, to suit whoever it is that's playing at the table. Much in the same way that you'd have to adjust if you were sitting at a much larger table or suddenly having to switch online. Like imagine a world where everyone had to stay home and nobody could go and share physical spaces together.
That sounds so weird.
I know.
Can't imagine it. That's weird. I don't know.
I know. It's gone too far. It's gone too far. But one of these days, mark my words, someone's going to improperly timestamp this video and I will be a prophet. But you know, it's go
like
ahead.
There are so I've always been in favor of safety tools. I've always been I mostly do spooky stuff, and like I gotta know what's okay and what's not okay if I'm gonna scare you. Like I can't do it without that information. But I also need to know what's not okay because I want you to have fun. The very first game I ever like sat in on, I can't get into details with because it's horrible, but it put me off of gaming for 2 years.
Oh wow!
Because I thought all games was like that, and I was like, nope. But like, and like I've like, especially with Changeling, to go back to Changeling, I refuse to play that game without people I know, because
it's hard.
I've seen it go bad. I've seen games like this go bad, and I refuse to put myself in that situation. At the same time, there are people I know who I would trust to like run that game for me. There are people I know who would trust me to run that game for them. And like when you set all this stuff up to be a part of your game, you're just doing one of the other things to facilitate gameplay. In my mind, it's no different from just the act of scheduling, because it's just so intrinsic to getting together and doing this thing supposedly for fun. I know I've had sessions where I'm like, am I having fun here? But like, supposedly we do this to have fun. And like, why? I don't understand. I think I come down to even if you don't need this, it doesn't hurt you to have it.
Right.
Like, it costs you nothing to do this thing, in the same way that it costs you nothing to have a accessible table in your restaurant. You can seat able-bodied folks there too. It's fine. It costs you nothing, but it makes it so that other people can feel good in that space. There was one other thing we mentioned, how we can use the technology that we've developed and answered, or not developed, but utilized in response to the everything going on in like real world in-person conventions. And I would like to mention the game Alice is Missing, where the entire game is nobody talks. It is just texting each other.
Yeah.
You're just in a room texting each other. And I own it. Almost everybody I know owns it. It's a really interesting game where we can sort of get by that like, for me personally, like speaking anxieties and just some of the other stuff. Like, if I'm at a convention, it's really hard to differentiate sounds. If I'm in a loud room, everybody's voice sounds like one sound to me. I can't pick out the voices. And like, man, if we're just sitting at a table at a convention and just texting each other, that's dope. Like, that would solve nearly all of my problems. And it would do, and that'd be great.
Yeah, being in a loud con room is like the oral equivalent of mashed potatoes for me. You know, like, it just I can't separate out anything, and it's rough. I will say, David, eventually I'm going to get you to make a changeling for my game. That's going to happen. I'm going to tell you that right now.
I definitely made one. I just never played it, but I made it. It's there. It's somewhere on this computer. So that aside, I came from an environment several years ago where it was with mushes and muxes and online forums and things like that. And I've really left that environment because it had a very first of all, you're not gaming with people you know a lot of the time. There's not safety tools that are involved, and there's very much a are you tough enough to take this? It's a very edgelordy kind of community in terms of, like, it started in the 90s, this community, and has never really kind of come into those safety tools. And so when I came away from that community and came into a community that used safety tools, I was like, what is even going on? Like, this is way more enjoyable. But the flip side of those safety tools themselves is that it doesn't have to always be about what you can't do in a game, because one of the things that we do in our player surveys that we use is that we talk about what are the things that you want to be involved in? What are the things that your character is really good at? How do we, as storytellers and fellow players, give you your crowning moment of awesome? Like, what would be the greatest thing
for your character to be able to do? Would you like to solve a mystery via oneromancy? Would you, what is the best thing you can think of your character doing? And that's part of that whole like safety tool rolled in together, because now we know what you don't want to do, but also like how we can make things fun for you. And I think that might be some of what gets lost in the conversation about safety tools, is that's part of it too. And why would you not want to talk to your fellow players about how you can make things so much more fun for them, so that they get to do the cool things that they want to do, and you can consider like, well, how could I do that in this plot line? And when is the time for me, if I'm a player at the table, to step back and let someone else have their moment in the sun? And that just makes it's just so much more fun, in my opinion, obviously. But we a lot of times look at those things as like we're talking about the no, and not realizing that the part of that is also talking about the yes
And also just so like in that same vein, the things we can't talk about, but like maybe there are things that are sensitive that you do want to talk about, that you do want to deal with, that you want to work out. I've had like, it's kind of sort of a meme now, kind of in the community, but like I've had players work out their like gender identities through their characters by playing other sexes, by playing other, like just playing other things, work out how they feel about themselves. And also like it helps beyond all of that to make this thing we're doing, the game, feel like a story that we are telling together, as opposed to a thing that is happening to you. Even if you're enjoying it, if you're not in the back and forth of the creation of the story, this is just a sequence of things happening to you that you are withstanding, as opposed to a thing you're creating together. And that's where the investment lies. That's where you get the good kinds of lead that you want,
Yep.
And I mean, I think a lot of that comes down to giving people a chance to see either themselves or see what they want to be in these games, and giving them the comfort and the support to be able to do that.
Yep.
And that actually kind of segues into something that has been a topic relatively recently in the discourse TM, but it has been stuff like more disability visibility in games. The combat wheelchair is kind of the ground zero of that discussion,
Right.
if you will. So what do you all think about us seeing ourselves more in these games?
I do want to side note that I am actually one of those people who came out as transgender after RPGs, so that's totally a thing. Like Orphans of Proteus, like that's totally, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, totally.
That happens. And I know people who, from dealing with mental health issues through games, have been able to say, maybe I should talk to someone about this.
Yeah,
so that's definitely a thing. But yeah, if you want to go first, David, because I'm not going to shut up when I start talking about this.
Neither am I is the thing, but I'll go anyway. So I'm of two minds here. Where I love the combat wheelchair. I love seeing like disabled characters in games. But sometimes the applications are less than great. I believe Wizards has changed it now. But when the I believe it was Wayfinder's Guide to Eberron came out, they had magical items that would be artificial limbs. And one of the problems were that, like, even just a normal one that would just replace the limb and not do anything other than that, it required attunement, and your character only gets 3 slots in 5e for attunement. And if I have to burn one of those to have 2 arms, when whatever happened, I did not have an arm, and now I can have a machine arm or something. that kind of blows. At the same time, I dubbed this the Witcher debate or discourse, where if you're in a world of magic and you are disabled, is it okay for you to want to fix yourself with magic? I say yes. I say you should be able to not have to. It shouldn't be something that, oh, why wouldn't you? Not because I don't want to. But if I can magic myself out of disability, I wish it wasn't like weird dark magic, but whatever. If I could heal my chronic pain and make my fine dexterity better and be able to speak fluently all the time. With magic, I'd be in line day one. This is also sort of the like rogue debate in like the third X-Men movie or et cetera, et cetera. I would love to live in a world where if I wanted to, I could get the 𝚃𝚘𝚍𝚍 visor, but also live in a world where maybe I don't have to, where there is technology where like it's like super braille or something. I don't know. I don't have to if I don't want to, but if I want to, I can.
Yep. So I think when you bring up Jordy and tech solutions and magic solutions, I think it's also maybe important to bring up the fact that for a lot of people, there are disability communities that are as much a culture as they are anything else. Like I can like point to the deaf culture is a big thing. Cripple punk culture exists. You know, and so by saying, well, why don't you snap your fingers and this just goes away, right? That's a really fraught question for a lot of us. And it's also something that could be interesting to engage at the table as a question of culture at the table. You know, like is how does your character who could, you know, get their ears fixed at any time engage with that question, you know? Another thing that I think is really important is, and I've addressed this, you know, with my own gaming group, and I don't think the things that I wrote about this have come out yet, but there's a, you know, the magical limb question, right? Like, when is it okay to blow up that relic? When is it okay to, you know, and how do you handle that? And I think that's one of the things that you really have to, as a storyteller and as a table, when you have something like that at the table, that needs to be a session zero conversation. You cannot spring that on someone, especially not a disabled player, but anyone, because that is a quick X card kind of like very traumatic event. And I don't think that a lot of able people understand that, or really have internalized the understanding. They may understand it mentally, but don't understand that like my wheelchair is a part of my body. And in a lot of places it's legally a part of my body, you know? And so if a storyteller just says, well, your character's wheelchair explodes. Well, to me, that's like someone just blew up my legs, you know, with no out of game conversation. We'd never talked about it before, you know, and we never talked about how we might handle that at the table, what circumstance. I didn't get an out of character warning. That would be the thing that happened in the 90s where nobody came back. Somebody didn't come back after that session. Like, I would not come back to that table. So I think it's really important when we get into magical limbs, magical fixes, you know, all of those things, however you decide to handle them at your table. Also, part of that question has to be, under what circumstances could those things go away, if any? You know, is this a done thing, you know? Because we have a rule on the game that I run that like any magical gender stuff can't be undone by any like you can't prime undo someone's life if they're using it to change their gender, for example. all of those things. And that can just be a rule at your table if you want it to, you know, but it has to be something that you as a group agree on ahead of time so that you don't have someone being literally traumatized. I mean, like, it's really upsetting. So, and for some people, it's on the realms of like character death upsetting, you know? So let's talk about it ahead of time, be prepared for it. And, you know, just as a group, acknowledge, is that going to be a thing at all for you? And if so, when and how?
I think it's also how something is actually presented. If it's forcing the conversation to go in a certain direction that is not really sticking to the theme, the overall kind of design of the game that was intended. So, you know, like basically adding cybernetic gear in a cyberpunk game is very much on brand. But at the same time, too, if you're, you know, if you design something where, yeah, you can go ahead and you can give yourself an artificial limb, but it functions the same as a magic item with the attunement and everything like that, you're actually forcing the conversation to happen in a very particular way for a reason that has nothing to do with how the game itself is actually played. You know, so I find how it's actually presented as like a finished product really, you know, can determine, you know, like what people can do with it. If it's something that's open-ended and allows you, if you want to then take this and start to explore, why would people want to go and, you know, have an arm for a cannon for an arm or some kind of thing like that. Or if you just want to have it simply because, you know what, the equipment rules really suck and I hate the idea that I have to use a minor action to draw my weapon. So, you know, however, but I find it's when something was done in the whole sense of like, nope, this is how the game has worked. And the only way to make it balanced, quote unquote, is it's going to cost an attunement. You're forcing it to do something, you know, that I find that's when it starts getting awkward. That's when it starts getting cumbersome. And, you know, that you're just asking for trouble that way.
Right.
God damn it, Tom. You made me recall that Shadowrun exists. The whole, every time that you get some sort of like cybernetic thing implanted, you're less of a person. You're less of a human being because of all the metal in you. Oh God, you made me remember that's a thing. Yeah, that's a thing. I have paragraphs about.
Trust me, I'm with you.
I've written paragraphs about it.
As someone who just did a cyberpunk game, I have opinions too. Trust me.
I don't. Like I see where that flavor is. I see what you're doing with it. If you are going for the "Are you more machine than person" storyline, I guess. But there's ways that you can narratively do that without mechanically doing that.
Correct.
And I think that's where a lot of games miss, is that if you need, I don't think you need to, but if you need to have that story, I think we're past that story. I think we can be beyond that story. I'm always of a type, and this has gotten me in hot water before, I'm of the type where certain stories no longer have to be told. They've been told and been told enough. We don't have to do them again. So we maybe don't have to do the "Are you more machine than person, and does that make you less of a person" thing. Maybe we can put that to bed and be done with it. But if you need it, you can narratively do that and not have to mechanically enforce that. It's always just sort of.
I was just going to say, and yet, I think people recognize that, because I have absolutely used Shadowrun as a joke to get people comfortable with my hearing aid. Because I when I first got it, I was like, I got a bone anchored hearing aid. I went through surgery, and I actually broke it down. Here's how much the surgery cost me. Here's how much it would have cost me in Shadowrun. Here's how much it cost me in Cyberpunk, and here's how much humanity and essence I lost in each game. And by the way, dystopian future is way better healthcare than I have right now.
Right.
People are going to joke about that because I was joking about it. But again, it goes back to the old comedy trope of you can joke about your own marginalized identity, but nobody else can joke about that to you.
Yeah, for sure.
I've been saying Cyberlegs when for years.
Right? Yeah.
Cyberlegs when for years.
Yep.
So we are getting close to time. So I want to make sure we have a chance to get some questions in. So if you do have a question in the chat, just preface it with the word question or highlight it, and I'll try to get through them. We have a few already. They are generally of a certain theme. So I'm going to kind of combine the ones we have, which is generally other people playing characters' disabilities and perhaps not playing them authentically. I'm not going to say inappropriately, but inauthentically. How do you guys feel about that?
I think a lot of times you can have people who come to things with good intentions, but handle them badly.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think you have people who come to things with, as a bad faith actor at your table. And I think the big question of how to handle that is how to you have to really kind of determine, is this a bad faith actor, or is this your buddy who is trying to be empathetic and maybe try to, expand their understanding through role-playing games, which is, of course, that's one of the benefits, right, of a role-playing game. But so that's the first question is this a bad faith actor, or is this someone who is ham-fistedly, trying to represent something? And after you have kind of determined that to the best of your ability, either as a storyteller or as a group, or, you need to, I would say, handle it together. Because one thing that I never like to have to do, even though I'm willing to do it, as you all know, is to be the person who says, please don't do that. About my own marginalized, yes, I know, I am the one who will do it. But I don't like to do it all the time.
No.
I'll do it, right? Because I'm capable of doing it. I know how to do it. I have that tough skin to be able to do it.
But there's also the, oh, fuck this again.
Yeah, right. I'm like, I don't need to have another conversation with someone about, how to deal with playing a character who has to be on painkillers all the time, or someone who has post-traumatic stress disorder and what it is and isn't. And, the idea that only military characters can have PTSD or whatever. I don't want to have that conversation all the time myself without support, so I think that as a table and as a gaming group, you kind of have to have those conversations as a whole. And if that means that, Bob and Alice and Dan all have to sit down together and figure out how they're going to approach this with Tony, well, then that's what you have to do, and how to handle it without making people feel like they're ganged up on. I don't have a magic bullet for that, but I think that it only can ever be with conversation. And I would always say that if you can come to the table with resources, so you're not just saying you're doing it wrong, but here's some information you could read about the reality of this situation. I'm sure that when I played somebody with a cochlear implant 10 years ago, I was doing it wrong, but I did the reading and I did the best I could. And if you had come to me and said, you're getting that wrong and it's bugging me, here's what here's what you can read, I would have been all over it. Right. So I think that's my best advice. Don't make the marginalized person do it alone. Right. And bring resources for that person to, and then also maybe know what you're going to do if it continues and it's hurtful,
Yeah. I think maybe a good way to take a look at it is that, if we all look at ourselves as role players, as a form of actor, or, and let's face it, we all are in some way, shape, or form. Oh, yeah. If you look at it as you're not playing a superhero who is a completely fictional character in a world that couldn't possibly exist, in which case, go wild. But look at it as you've been cast to play a very particular person in a biography of that person, which means that you can't just go ahead and change their mannerisms, change the tone of their voice, change things about their history or something like that. You've got to work with the actual material. So I think that's maybe the best way of doing it. If you're not prepared to be that level of actor who's, going to do the work and make sure to actually do it right rather than do it your way, then don't bother. There's almost no point, because it's just going to end up causing problem some way, shape, or form somehow, you know what I mean? And then it comes down to the sense of just it to me, it just doesn't feel worth it. I'm not comfortable doing something if I have no assurance that I'm going to completely screw it up. And I have screwed it up before. And now I made something years and years back that basically, I had no idea about Wiccans, pagans, and these kind of people. And so I made something that was completely inadvertently, but still disparaging towards them. And that when I discovered what it was that I had done, I felt very ignorant and that I wasn't very responsible as a creator to just be like, oh yeah, they all worship Satan, bad thing, terrible stuff, they all gonna die. That was fucking stupid. That was really fucking stupid of me. So that's now I look at it as like, well, now in the future, I'm no longer going to just assume, these are the kind of people that are going to be my villains, for example. Right. I'm going to double check on that, because if it turns out, because in this particular case, we're now working on something that is trying to do a complete flip of that. And it's far more interesting than this most basic piece of shit that I came up with years ago. So, if you look at it as a bio, if you're not going to put the work into it to do it responsibly, I say don't touch it.
And I mean, there's a tone thing to this too. Like a lot of stuff we've been talking about has been playing relatively realistic games or horror games and whatnot. And I had fallen into the trap of, well, my silly dog game doesn't have to worry about that. And that's also just not true. Since we've just announced it, I worked on They Came From Classified, which is going to be our spy spoof game. And one of the things I told Matthew, like day one, I was like, okay, so you realize that every James Bond villain is ultimately a disability disorder, right? Can we just put a sidebar in there about that? And he was like, yeah, sure. Go ahead.
I've been holding that to come to it at some point, because honestly, I do want to say that there is, I believe it's in Scion Demigod, there is a really, really excellent section that was written about the portrayal of disability in myth, and how a lot of times, disability is a shorthand for bad and evil. And how to engage with that safely at your table. Since Demigod is in some form available, I think if you backed it, you have the manuscript at this point. I don't remember what status it's in, but I highly, highly recommend reading that section, which was written by a disabled writer, and is really fantastic. But the tendency to use disability as a shorthand for evil, and to use the DSM as a monster manual, is something that is very, very pervasive, not just in gaming, but like in media in general, and culture. Like, you really have to be careful with that. And if you're finding yourself saying, well, I'm just going to put this villain in a wheelchair, why? Like, and
the number of bad guys who stutter.
Why they're evil? Oh my God, I know. Is there disability why they're evil? Did they become disabled and now they hate everyone and now they're a villain? Don't do that. Like, never do that again. That's like the, more machine now than man, twisted and evil. We've had that story, and maybe we don't. Yeah.
Right. But that's one thing I talked about in my sidebar, which no one has seen yet. But it's like if the disability is the joke, change it. If the character is funny for other reasons and also happens to be disabled, that's actually kind of cool. It's like they're funny for completely different reasons.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely.
To go back to the original question, and to be the more harsh person, for lack of a better term, have like approval systems in my games where if you before we start, show me your character sheet, tell me what your character is, let me know what you're doing, and if it works, it's fine. If not, then it doesn't work. Because I've had situations where there's not about disability but more race. I've had a player in my game play a Warforged mage who what they were trying to go for was a very like Black Panther party character, but it came off as you're just like racist to all non-Warforged. There's this whole scene that we had where they are interacting in a library, and the librarian is a Warforged, and they pull the Warforged aside and ask them, like, how are they treating you here? Are they treating you okay? Are they paying you? And I'm just like, after this game, we have to talk about this, because I am not comfortable with how you're portraying this character. This is not interesting to me. And the thing you described is not how this would work. Unless you want it to be a parody of that, which I would have never approved. So either we have to work on this, or, like, if you feel you're not up to this, we can off-ramp the character and play something else, because that's also something I do in all my games. You can always change your character whenever, I don't care.
Sure.
And that's what ended up happening, is that they couldn't get a handle on those themes, because I'll just say it, they're white and they've never experienced it, so they don't know. And I don't fault them for not wanting to do that work in a game we do for fun. So we off-ramp the character, and now they play something else. It's fine. And that's, I feel like, one, you have to have, I believe personally, you have to have something like that in play, where if it's not working, if they don't want to do the fixes, this is all assuming that they are in good faith, then they can change characters if they need to. But to be the more harsh person, maybe, if they are either acting in bad faith, or they don't want to do the work but also don't want to change the character, well, I have told people to not come back before. I have zero problem doing that, because as the storyteller, DM, GM, depending on the game, I am the arbiter of everybody else's fun. I gotta make sure everybody's having fun. And if this isn't having fun, I'm sorry, we can still be friends. Maybe it hasn't really worked out, but that, you know.
Yeah, we've definitely.
You're not playing this game anymore.
Yeah, we've definitely banned people from Dusk Till Dawn for similar reasons, which is the game that I run. But the one thing I did want to bring up, because you brought this issue, right, is that you're talking about race, we're talking about disability. There's a tendency, I think, in a lot of conversations about these things to treat each of these things as discrete portions of a character or discrete portions of a person's identity, and that's not how it works. So as you're building a character, if you're like, so the fact that I am a disabled person, right, and the nature of my disabilities is one thing, right, but it is not unaffected by the fact that I am transgender, by the fact that I am fat, by the fact that I was assigned female at birth, by the fact that I am white, you know, so there's all kinds of, by the fact that I'm Jewish, but, you know, all these things, they're not a checklist, right? It's not, I'm Jewish and that's separate from being, I'm fat and that's separate from being. All of the ways that I interact with the world are parts of this kind of like interlocking puzzle of a person, and they all touch each other. And I think that's really important when we're building characters or building worlds or building NPCs, that you can't treat it like a checklist, right? You've got to treat it like a whole thing. And
they're
if
a person, they're not a disability.
Yes, absolutely. And if you don't feel up to doing that, that's okay. Like, you're not required. It doesn't make you a more virtuous person to play a disabled character. It does not make you a more virtuous ST. Like, this is not like you're not getting cookies. You are not getting points. You are not, you know, ascending to you know, for the most pure, which tends to be a kind of a very harmful mindset that we have, right? The least problematic. You know, I just kind of feel like that's a golden apple that we throw into the middle of our conversations, like, who is the least problematic? And, you know, but that's not how it works. It's okay to, oh my gosh, everyone is, right? And everyone is. But if you're not okay, if you can't do it, then don't do it. That's okay. You know, it's sometimes better to not do it than to do it wrong.
And I think it's a good way to kind of wrap this up because we are over on time.
Yes.
But this has been a fantastic conversation. So thank you all for taking the time to do this. Let people know how to find you, Spider, where they find you online if they want to talk more.
Sure. I am on every social media except Instagram because someone somehow got this login before me. I'm VA Spider, VASPIDER. Or you can find my art and my means of supporting myself at 𝚃𝚘𝚍𝚙𝚎𝚛.com, which you may have heard of in the Exalted Essence Kickstarter ongoing. And my Patreon is also VA Spider as well.
Awesome. David?
You can find me on Twitter at the Inked Knights, where I talk about RPG stuff and get yelled at by people a lot. You can also find my Patreon, where I make 5e content based on like movies, films, TV shows, stuff like that. Is Ink-Stained Studios, Ink-Stained Studios. And that's all I've got, really.
That's fine. Todd?
My name's Todd Crapper, like the flush toilet. Just do a search for that. Use your filters. For the love of God, use your filters. But the only thing I do want to specifically plug is coming soon. We're going to have visionlayers.com. That's the website that's basically going to provide information on the stuff I was talking about earlier, and I'll also provide video lessons and downloadable tutorials so others can be able to do these things themselves.
Awesome.
And you can find me at pugsteady.com. I'm on Twitter at pugsteady. I hang around in the OnyxPath Discord a fair bit. And if you like this kind of rambling nonsense, you can also listen to me and my colleagues on the OnyxPathcast every week on Fridays. So with that, again, thank you all for coming. Thank you all for in the chat for the great questions, great commentary, and enjoy the rest of the convention. See y'all later.
Bye.
Bye.